My name is Nina Brennecke. I'm a client executive at the Carbon Trust, and I'm here today with my colleague Sarah Laidler, who's a senior consultant as part of our delivery team. And we actually very much build on what Kim was just talking about. So we really want to talk about advancing on a credible net zero goals or a credible net zero route, and really want to talk a bit about what does best practice look like. So maybe just to start, in case I'm sure there's probably some in here that don't know the Carbon Trust yet. So we're a climate change and sustainability consultancy, and maybe one thing that distinguishes us a bit from other companies is that we're mission driven, with that mission being to accelerate the move to a decarbonized future. We've been working on that mission for more than 20 years now, which might not sound that long, but within the field of sustainability consulting is actually quite a lot of years to look back on. And as you can see, we're like worldwide, we operate worldwide. We have offices all around the globe, and actually also just a few weeks ago opened an office here in Germany, in Berlin. So that's quite exciting news. We're a team of more than 400 experts and consultants. So in terms of what we do and also what we want to focus on today, we really support companies on their end-to-end net zero transition journey. So as you can see here, of course, before you can even think about a net zero transition journey, you really have to kind of get insights of your companies, where you currently are, collect the data, calculate your carbon footprint on an organization as well as a value chain basis, look into your climate risk and opportunities, and then, of course, once you have established that, you have a bit of a robust basis and can then go on to the next stage to really like plan and strategize and set science-aligned or science-based targets and develop a decarbonization strategy that Sarah will elaborate on a bit more, and really develop a robust plan. And of course, the next stage, you have to think about how are you actually going to implement that plan, develop KPIs to really have interim targets that you can actually achieve. And of course, lastly, reporting and communicating, I guess what we're also doing today. So we have a lot of assurance services, but of course, there's also, as mentioned earlier, a lot of disclosures and reporting coming our way. And as you can see, this is very much an iterative process. No one has a perfect value chain footprint right away. And also the same goes for your decarbonization strategy. That's really something that needs to be adjusted over time. So if we maybe zoom out a little bit, I put together a bit of a graph here. So this data is all from the Science-Based Targets Initiative, which I'm sure you're all aware of. So here, particularly for the DACH region, so Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, I put together some numbers. So as you can see here, comparing March 23 to March 2022, there's like a drastic increase in companies that are committing to science-based targets, but also net zero targets. And again, this has increased again from March to October. So I actually just looked at the numbers last night. So we really see a lot of companies, not only, or more and more companies setting targets, but also really increasing their ambition, which of course is very great news for all of us. And also, as you can see, less and less companies having well below 2-degree targets. Another maybe less fortunate development is also that there's more companies now actually removing their commitments. So I think there were around 4 within the German market, which of course is not really great development to see, but I think it really emphasizes how important it is to also, when setting a target, which of course a lot of companies can set net zero targets or set science-based targets, but actually thinking about, okay, what can this transition plan look like in practice, and making it really like credible and robust. And best practice of those net zero transition plans is what my colleague Sarah is going to talk about.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you for introducing that. So the next sort of part of the presentation that we wanted to cover is what best practice looks like within those transparent net zero transition plans. Building on what the previous speakers have already said, we've seen a lot of frameworks that have been developed over the last few years, more of them coming into light very recently around the Transition Plan Task Force, and we've also seen the CSRD, which will affect a lot of the companies in the room as well. On top of that, we also have specific sector guidance as well that also contributes to this, which is important to consider, and I'll go into that a little bit but what I want to highlight here is this isn't necessarily the full list of everything, but more so what the themes that we're seeing in these action plans, in these net zero roadmaps that really bring in transparency and credibility into light. As you know, the Transition Plan Task Force and CSRD focus a lot on advocacy and governance, and also that transparency element as well, and how that's going to happen, more so around sort of that financial planning, what capital allocation is going to be put behind these decarbonisation levers for your organisation. On top of that, defining the ambition on where you're aligned to, hopefully mostly aligned with SBTI, as Nina said, towards 1.5 degrees, and also any sector-specific guidance that might come around with that. But I think also on this slide, it's important to mention that sector-specific guidance will determine what that final climate transition plan will look like. So if I looked at a steel company's climate transition plan compared to a fashion retailer, you would see different elements on top of this and also redacted from this on how that would look across the market. So for instance, just transition would be a lot in fashion retailer. Your steel sector would have a lot more around the specific guidance from SBTI, for instance. But on top of that, you'd also see some of the key elements that are themed within this. So important to remember, this isn't the full list, but it will help define what that strategic ambition will be. And that goal of all these transition plans is that we're looking for that economy-wide transition and how that's going to be supported, which will vary from sector to sector. I think on top of that, excuse me, it's important to highlight the context that defines the why of that plan and why that climate transition plan has come to light. So from the transition plans that we've helped our own clients develop, a few of the main drivers behind this is the brand potential that you have behind it. So that credible communication of sustainability credentials for your brand is extremely important. I've been at Carbon Trust coming up 8 years in January. We've, at least in my time, I've seen disclosure, assurance being a very, very key topic. Then we moved to science-based targets, and absolutely all the companies want to set science-based targets. But currently now, in my opinion, it won't be enough just to set the target. I think SBTI, I think other public bodies and frameworks are going to be looking for these credible climate transition plans. And if you don't have one, you're putting yourself at risk. The strategic opportunity behind that also unlocks, as we've known from Kim as well, who's just discussed this, that you have some sizable business opportunities in the low carbon market, and you can unlock innovation as well. Behind that, you sort of have to, with policy and compliance. You're being told by your regulators that this is going to be a central part of your disclosure and very important to have in your annual reports. And finally, in that competitive positioning as well, more so, at least in some of the UK companies, particularly around sort of pubs, restaurant, hospitality, it's shocking how not many of these are coming to light. There's still a wide open space for many brands to be the first to have that credible action plan in a certain sector. So positioning yourself in a competitive space is also really important. A really big key part of these transition plans, especially that we work with organisations, is using this analysis to test your gap to target. So using that drive of that SBTI target, whether it be 1.5 or more sector specific, to have clarity on what you should prioritise for decarbonisation. So what we start with when we do this sort of modelling is looking at that business as usual emissions before and after growth. And arguably, I'd probably say that your growth is your determining factor on how this looks like in the future. Knowing your growth projections, whether that be on a product basis, whether that be on a financial basis, will determine exactly how you sort of forecast these decarbonisation opportunities coming to light. And how we separate these is looking at your uncontrollables versus your controllables. So, for instance, is there uptake of renewables in grids that you're operating in? How does that come into play as your decarbonisation progresses? Perhaps this is a very hypothetical example, but your controllables of, if you're agribusiness, fertilizer optimization or sequestration. How are you going to get logistic reductions? How are you going to get downstream reductions in your product, for instance? And all of these mounting up to how that's going to equip you to reach that net zero target by 2050, 2040, wherever you're setting it. But the idea behind this is that you understand what is prioritised to go ahead for your decarbonisation levers, but also through this you can credibly and transparently communicate this to your stakeholders and your customers on how that's going to be achieved. And very importantly, it's worth highlighting that this is very much an iterative process. This will change depending on your growth. It will depend on the different projects that you're putting in place. But the idea is that you can measure this against valuable KPIs, how you're putting that into action. As I said, completing that assessment of the gap to target helps define that priorities and operationalise that decarbonisation strategy that you have. The first that you have is those actions and initiatives, so you can recommend the near-term actions and initiatives that will help make that roadmap realised, but also in the long term, you can be transparent and discuss around sort of sector challenges and barriers that may stop you doing that. So it's very important to sort of highlight what you're leaping into as a decarbonisation strategy, but how that's going to be overcome in the sector challenges and barriers that are already in place. Footprinting and data infrastructure acts as a very good catalyst. So understanding your footprinting practices. I really enjoyed Kim's point on the fact that data completeness is a key steering factor in this. I'm very much in the mindset that you don't have to have data perfection to create a climate transition plan. There's no such thing as data perfection, at least in my time that I've seen companies walk through the door. You'll always have sort of gaps that can be improved, and you'll always have areas that you wish you had sort of more accurate data, but that shouldn't stop you from putting out disclosure and putting out what you can do to improve that in the future. And as we know, governance and monitoring, advising on that best practice principles in decarbonisation for monitoring to embed and account for those net zero transition plans. I also see that across different sectors, if you, around that monitoring, and there's not really a sort of quantitative KPI to use, you can use in terms of that uptake of how you're going to achieve that strategy, so percentage coverage, for instance. But it's important to make sure that if that data quality is lacking and it prohibits you from sort of using a data point, you create a KPI on how you're going to measure success, and that's very important to get across to stakeholders. And finally, that roadmap funding, advising on best practice for that transition plan and financial planning is really important, especially for TPT and also CSRD. But I think what's also a very interesting space, particularly in specific sectors, is how that funding might come on a joint initiative partnership, for instance, or how that can be tackled as a wider sector problem. And then finally, what comes after transition plans? So once you've got that out there, do you just sort of leave it? It's done. We don't have to worry about it for many years. That's not true. So I thought it would be useful to highlight a case study that we've worked with one of our clients. So Doc Martens, a boot manufacturer, they sold 14.1 million shoes in 2021. This was part of a follow-up piece of work that we did on a scenario-based analysis for decarbonisation potential. So we embedded, or modelled rather, a circular business model presenting the business case for change, particularly those in the retail fashion world, if there's many in the room, will know putting in circular business models in sort of a fast fashion environment or putting into any fashion environment is a bit scary. So thinking about this and how that can have a decarbonisation impact and also be profit making is really interesting. So what we did there was model the mitigation potential of a repair and resale model alongside the profit making capacity of a business model, so they can simultaneously build their business alongside decarbonisation. So the idea is that the uptake of that repair and resale overtakes their growth of putting out more boots onto the market. That's one of the examples that we've used on building on implementation and piloting projects on the back of climate action plans. And we'll be very happy to talk to you about that in the roundtable at 12 o'clock. I hopefully just made it in time. Thank you so much.